Every empire that's ever fallen, Rome, the Mongols, the Aztecs, the Ottomans, all of them, collapsed by following the exact same 5-step checklist: surplus, overreach, rot, fracture, collapse. Every single time. But here's the part that should actually bother you. The 5 cracks are already sitting inside every powerful system alive right now. You just haven't been shown where to look. So let's look. It starts, every time, with food. Around 4000 BCE, the people of Uruk in Mesopotamia figured out how to grow wheat and barley instead of chasing it. That sounds like a win. And for a while, it was. Uruk grew into a city of 50,000 people, bigger than anything the world had seen. But growing food you don't eat that same day creates something new. A surplus. And a surplus creates a question nobody had ever needed to answer before. Who gets to decide where it goes? That single question is the seed of every civilization that's ever existed. Someone has to store the grain, guard the grain, and ration the grain. Therefore, someone ends up in charge of the grain. In Egypt, that person became a pharaoh, believed to rule even after death. In China, it became a king, claiming a literal mandate from heaven. In Mesopotamia, it became Sargon the Great, conquering his way to the top of the pile. Different costumes, same shape. Farmers at the bottom doing the actual work. A narrowing chain of people above them, and one person at the very top who gets to call all of it destiny. Here's the detail almost nobody mentions. Farming didn't just create rulers, it shrank the people underneath them. The average Sumerian farmer was measurably shorter and less healthy than the hunter-gatherers who came before him. Civilization's very first trade was freedom and stature, exchanged for stability and a full granary. That trade never stopped being the deal. It just got more sophisticated. Once the hierarchy is stable, it doesn't sit still. It expands. A leader who inherits a settled, secure pyramid faces an uncomfortable problem. Peace doesn't prove you deserve to be at the top. Conquest does. So Ramesses II marched on Kadesh to prove Egypt could push back the Hittites. Alexander the Great, tutored by Aristotle himself, crossed from Greece to Persia to India, adding an empire the size of a continent before he turned 30. Trajan pushed Rome's borders from Britain to the Persian Gulf. Genghis Khan, abandoned by his own clan as a child, united 1 million people and then sent cavalry through half of Asia. Suleiman the Magnificent stretched the Ottomans from the Balkans to Baghdad. None of these men were the same person, separated by continents and centuries. But every one of them made the identical bet, that the empire could keep getting bigger without anything underneath it breaking. For a while, the bet pays off. Conquest brings loot, tribute, slaves, trade routes, the kind of wealth that makes a golden age look inevitable. Rome built aqueducts. Baghdad built the House of Wisdom. The Mongols connected the Silk Road end to end. This is always the part of the story that gets remembered as glory. But therefore, and this is the hinge the whole playbook turns on, every mile of new territory is also a new border to defend, a new population that didn't choose to be ruled, and a new distance between the person giving orders and the people paying for them. Overreach doesn't feel like a mistake while it's happening. It only becomes one later, when the bill comes due. At this exact point in the story, the empire itself doesn't know it's in trouble yet. You do. You've just watched a grain surplus turn into a continent-sized bet, and you already know 3 more steps are coming. So here's the question. What's already sitting at step 2 right now that hasn't caught up to itself yet? Drop your guess in the comments. By the end of this video, you'll be able to check it against the full checklist. And the bill always comes due at home, not on the frontier. This is the step every empire tries hardest to hide, because it isn't a battle anyone can point to. It's slower than that. Picture Rome's Senate. furious that Julius Caesar was gaining more popularity with the people than they had, ordering him to disband his army or be branded an enemy of the state, not because he'd lost a war, but because he'd won too much support from ordinary Romans. Picture the Catholic Church selling indulgences, official paperwork that promised to shorten your time in purgatory, while Martin Luther watched regular people hand over money they didn't have. Picture the Ming dynasty's imperial court, tangled in factionalism and corruption, while the actual threat, the Manchu army, gathered on the border almost unnoticed. The mechanism is the same in every one of these. Whoever sits at the top of the pyramid built in step 1 starts optimizing for keeping their seat instead of keeping the structure standing. Wealth pools upward. Warnings get filtered out before they reach the top, because nobody wants to be the person who brings bad news to a king. The people doing the actual farming, fighting, and building absorb the cost of decisions they had no part in making: heavier taxes, forced labor, indulgences, tribute. Here's the part that should feel uncomfortably familiar. Rot never announces itself as rot. It always shows up wearing the language of tradition, order, or piety. Nobody sells indulgences and calls it corruption. They call it salvation. Rot alone doesn't kill an empire. Plenty of corrupt, exhausted systems limp along for generations. What actually breaks the structure is the 4th step, the moment the people at the top stop agreeing on who the top even is. When Alexander died at 32, he hadn't named an heir, so his generals divided his entire empire into 3 pieces and spent years fighting each other over the rest. When Charlemagne's son Louis the Pious died, his grandsons carved the Holy Roman Empire into 3 kingdoms at the Treaty of Verdun, and the middle one, squeezed between the other 2, barely lasted a generation. When the Roman Emperor Diocletian tried to solve Rome's size problem by splitting it into 4 rulers at once, he didn't fix the succession problem. He multiplied it by 4. Within a few years, 3 of the 4 original leaders were gone, and Constantine was fighting his way to sole power over the wreckage. Notice the pattern inside the pattern. Fracture almost never comes from an outside enemy. It comes from inheritance, from ambition inside the family, from nobody having settled in advance who inherits the grain silo everyone spent step 1 building around. An empire that can survive famine, plague, and invasion can be finished off by a succession dispute that never gets resolved cleanly. The wall doesn't fall because someone pushed on it from outside. It falls because the people supposed to be holding it up started pushing against each other instead. This is the lowest point in the whole staircase, the moment the people at the top are fighting each other instead of holding anything up. It's also the point every single empire in this video reached right before the part everyone actually remembers, the fall itself. If you want to see exactly how that last step plays out, and how it's never the reason people think it is, subscribe now, because that's coming up next. This is where most retellings of history start, and that's exactly the mistake. The barbarian at the gate, the plague ship arriving in port, the invading army finally breaking through. These get remembered as the cause. They're not. They're the finishing blow on a body that had already given up defending itself. Rome didn't fall in 410 AD because the Visigoths were unstoppable. Rome fell because a century of corruption, an empire split by Theodosius between 2 incapable sons, and a fractured chain of command left the gates barely guarded when the Visigoths finally showed up, the first time in nearly 800 years anyone had managed to take the city. Constantinople didn't fall in 1453 because Sultan Mehmed II had better cannons, although he did. It fell because the Byzantine Empire had already been weakened for generations by internal instability and economic collapse before those cannons ever fired a shot. The Aztec and Incan empires didn't fall only because of Spanish guns. Disease that Europeans carried and had already survived tore through populations that had never encountered it, hollowing out both empires from the inside before the fighting even settled anything. In every single case, the external shock gets the credit, or the blame, in the history books, because it's the visible, dramatic, filmable moment. But look one step earlier every time, and you'll find the same 3 steps already completed. Overreach, rot, fracture. The invader doesn't cause the collapse. The invader just happens to be standing there the day the structure finally gives out. So here's the full checklist, laid out one more time. A surplus creates a hierarchy. The hierarchy overreaches to justify itself. The overreach creates a rot that nobody in charge wants to name. The rot goes unresolved long enough that the people at the top fracture over who's really in charge. And the fracture leaves the whole structure standing on nothing, waiting for whatever shows up next to knock it down. Every civilization you've ever heard of walked this exact staircase, in a different costume, at a different speed. Some took 8 centuries, like Rome. Some took less than 1 lifetime, like the Aztec Empire. But the steps never change, because the steps were never really about empires. They're about what happens anytime humans build something that gets too big for any one person to see all of at once. And that isn't unique to the ancient world. It's happening again, right now, inside systems you interact with every day, at whatever step they happen to currently be standing on. Empires, in the end, die the same way people do. Not from one dramatic blow, from a body that had already stopped defending itself, long before anyone noticed. That's a hard thing to sit with, because it means the fall was never really about the invader, the plague, or the year on the calendar. It was about a body that quietly gave up on itself first. And that's not just an ancient world story. It's about whatever you're a part of right now. A company, a country, a system you rely on. And whether it's still defending itself or has already quietly stopped. If this reframed the way you look at how empires fall, like this video and subscribe, so the next one lands in your feed the moment it's out.